And that is what leads to these bad outcomes. South Africa would achieve much better outcomes if the government were to let business get on with it and not interfere so much.
A senior official in the National Treasury has used the F word. Joining me to discuss what exactly he was referring to is John Endres, Director of the CRA and the co-author of our weekly Risk Alert. So John, what was the F word that was used exactly, and why is this significant?
So the F word is maybe not what you think, David. The F word in this case was failing state. And that is maybe an F word that is even more scary than what we usually consider to be the F word. The Treasury official in question was the Director General of the Treasury, so a very high-ranking member of that administration. And what he said firstly was that public servants and politicians need to get off their high horse and, quote, do what we have to do to ensure we create access and a conducive environment for people's lives to change. And then he went on to say, if that's not going to be a motivating factor, we can start calling SA a failing state, because the things that define a failing state are beginning to show, where we don't care about the poor and improving their lives. And that was the context where the F word was used.
So John, that's a pretty significant statement from a senior Treasury official. What does this tell us about the capacity of the state in general, but also the policy orientation of the government?
Well, the Treasury's Director General, Mr. Mogojane, linked the idea of the failing state to the concept of corruption, self-enrichment, and of leading politicians and civil servants not doing their jobs properly, sort of being more focused on their own interest rather than on helping the people they are meant to serve. And while this is certainly an important point, I would argue that it is even more important to look at the kind of policy environment which is created by the ANC, by the government, under which officials like Mr. Mogojane operate. And we had an example of that quite recently, where Mr. Mogojane himself actually circulated a note to all government departments advising them to put all tenders on ice and also not to issue any new tenders until the Treasury had been able to study a constitutional court judgment. And that constitutional court judgment said that it was impermissible for Treasury to disqualify companies that weren't 100% Black-owned from state tenders outright, which is currently the case. So there was a regulation issued in 2017 by Treasury that said if your company is not 100% Black-owned, we can immediately disbar, disqualify, and exclude you from any state tenders. The Constitutional Court has now ruled that that is not permissible. So in other words, Treasury does now need to think about its procurement approach, but instead of saying, well, okay, then we won't apply that rule to our procurement, they have said we'll put it all on ice while we study it, which is a very drastic measure if you think about it, because it means that the state at present is not able to buy anything from the private sector. And that includes medical supplies, safety equipment, rolling monthly contracts that need to be renewed and so on. It's quite a dramatic step.
All right. And for our viewers who are interested in understanding that issue more carefully, we did a video with Gabriel Krauser last week, which you can access here. So John, let's get back to the question of policy, because the DG was saying, without significant change, we're not going to be able to meaningfully improve poor people's lives. So what is exactly holding back our ability to alleviate poverty and to elevate our growth levels? What are some of the policy bottlenecks that are being created here?
Well, one specific example is that in the case of this procurement regulation, the Minister of Finance does have the authority to say that race-based criteria must simply not be taken into account, and that procurement should take place on the basis of price, quality, and the ability to deliver, as Justice Zondo also required of the public sector to do in one of his reports. But the fact that the finance minister is not doing that, I think, is a reflection of how important these ideological concepts are. It is very hard to let go of them. We also see it in the labor market, where we have this terribly high unemployment rate. And the government must be certainly racking its brains to figure out what to do about this, how to create jobs. But the response has been a very curious one.
Yeah, so John, about 46% unemployment on the expanded definition. What exactly is driving that?
Well, it's a factor of lacking economic growth. And we don't have economic growth because our policy environment is not conducive. And we see that the response of the government to this jobs crisis has been, amongst other things, to mull the idea of introducing quotas for foreigners. In other words, some industry sectors might have a 10% or 20% cap on the share of foreigners who might be employed in those sectors, while other sectors might exclude foreigners entirely from occupation, from employment in that sector. Now, that approach is not going to create any new jobs. It is a counterproductive approach that is going to worsen relationships with neighboring countries and make it more difficult to address questions of migration and also economic development. And we have a similar idea being applied to South Africans as well, in terms of the Employment Equity Amendment Bill, which is a law that is currently making its way through the lawmaking process. And what that law envisages is that the Labour Minister will be able to set numerical targets by race for different industry sectors and for regions. And this is effectively race quotas. And what it would mean is that, once again, companies would be required to fire certain employees and to hire other employees in order to achieve a certain racial composition. And that, once again, is a form of social engineering that's not going to add to the number of jobs in the country. On the contrary, it is going to reduce the economic growth rate and probably increase the rate of unemployment.
So now, John, we at the CRA often argue that the reason why these hostile policies exist is because they are the expression of the prevailing ideology of the government of the day. Do you care to elaborate on that?
So the prevailing ideology is driven by something that is known as the National Democratic Revolution. And the philosophy underlying that is that the state must play a central role in arranging the economy of a country. That is part of the idea, on the road to a socialist future for the country. In other words, it is not good enough to let businesses and individuals get on with their economic exchanges, their hiring decisions, their economic policies, and so on. But in other words, the government must take a controlling interest in that. And that is what leads to these bad outcomes. South Africa would achieve much better outcomes if the government were to let business get on with it and not interfere so much.
So, John, this analysis was featured in our weekly risk alert. And if anybody's interested in receiving those alerts, they can join us via our 30-day free trial. There's a link in the description. But also, I just wanted to take a quick moment to remind our viewers that we have a new strategic intelligence briefing, which you are delivering to clients. Do you care to tell us more about this briefing and what our audience could get out of it if they were to book you as a speaker?
So the new intelligence briefing is called Towards a Tipping Point for South Africa. And this is really where we go into a great deal of detail on the statistics, on the political trends, the economic trends, the social trends in South Africa, and really give you some deep insight into what is going on, why it is happening, and also what is likely to occur next.
John Endres, thank you very much. I would certainly encourage our existing premium clients to get in touch with us. That briefing forms part of your existing subscription. If you're not yet a premium subscriber to the CRA, you can also book John for a strategic intelligence briefing, but there will be an appearance fee attached to that. There are details in the description below if you would like to find out more. Also, you can get in touch with us at info@cra-sa.com. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.